Welcome again to another program of Searching for Answers. On my right is
Richard Rice, Loma Linda University.
And John Jones, La Sierra University.
And Bernard Taylor, Loma Linda University Church.
Well, you see, we have some very good scholars on with us tonight. And if you will gather your Bibles and go to 1 Corinthians. We're just about to chapter 16, so we're going to back up a little bit to do some reviewing. Okay, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind going before chapter 16, starting wherever you like the resurrection body, and read some verses for us, and we'll discuss that, and then we'll go on.
All right, let's begin with 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 35. And Paul has been talking about the resurrection and the reality of the resurrection of the dead. This is a chapter that doesn't have his usual introduction, now concerning, but he must have heard that this was an issue, and so he's been discussing it. And now we come to an important part in his argument, as all of us is. Again, verse 35. But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? Fool, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And as for what you sow, you do not sow the body that is to be, but a bare seed, perhaps of wheat or of some other grain. But God gives it a body as he has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. Now all flesh is alike, but there is one flesh for human beings, another for animals, another for birds, and another for fish. There are both heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is one thing, and that of the earthly is another. There is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. Indeed, stars differ from star in glory. Well, there's a place to begin.
That's a wonderful place to begin, and it lays it all out, and you can understand what it says, that things come up from a seed, how it's planted. You know, when you sow in your garden, you put seeds in, cover it up a little bit, water it, and a plant comes up. But you can take a different seed and put it in the garden, and it'll be a different plant, which is amazing. And then he goes on to say that there's men have flesh, animals have another kind of skin, and I think it's a very wonderful explanation of the covering that we all have. John Jones, would you continue on, please, on verse 42?
Well, we can certainly do that. I think in doing it, we're going to find ourselves drawn back to the paragraph we've just looked at as well to unpack it a little further. But let's see where we're headed here.
Okay.
We'll pick up with 42 then. We've had this kind of picture set out in front of us, haven't we? With Paul saying, okay, look, he calls them fools. You don't know God's diversity, yeah? You don't know the richness of his creation. Let me illustrate it. Fish, birds, stars, sun, moon. Okay, now where do we go with this? Verse 42. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. Now he's going to bring it home, you know, and anchor his analogy and the point he's making. What is sown or planted, then, is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. And we're going to see some contrasts here now in verse 43. Sown in dishonor is raised in glory. Sown in weakness, raised in power. Sown a physical body, raised a spiritual body. And we're going to want to look at that expression, I'm sure, in a moment in more detail. In fact, he goes on and says, almost in parentheses, if there is a physical body, there is also a spiritual body, kind of nudging him, saying, you do know that, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So then, verse 45, thus it's written. And now he wants to lay down the analogy between the two Adams, the parallel and the difference, both. So it's written, he says in verse 45, the first man, Adam, became a living being, quoting from Genesis. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Paul is still playing with that distinction between body and spirit, physical and spiritual here. The two Adams exemplify that difference. But, verse 46, it's not the spiritual that comes first, but the physical, then the spiritual. 47. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust, second man from heaven. And as was the man of dust, so are those who are of the dust, and as is the man of heaven, so are those who are of heaven. Two kinds of human beings already in this life.
Can we stop right there and
Okay,
and
the paragraph
explain
ends
a
at the
little
next
bit?
verse here, 49. So then he just rounds off his thought. Thus we have borne the image of the man of dust, and we will bear the image of the man of heaven.
Okay.
Punto.
Okay, Rick Rice. Tell me, what do you think of this explanation? Is it easy to understand?
Well, not for me, maybe for our viewers. My hunch is Paul is addressing people who have denied the resurrection, probably because, or at least in part because, they had no way of understanding how something that dies and goes
Yeah.
into the ground could possibly have any future. So whatever future life there is, it would be apart from the life that was before.
Right.
And I get the feeling here that what Paul is saying is that what goes into the ground does in fact come out of the ground. And it's that, it's sort of the seed that's sown metaphor, you know.
Goes in a seed and
Right.
comes out a
and,
plant.
and this idea that seeds are dead, you know, we find elsewhere in the Bible, you know,
Yeah.
the seed has to die before it can come out. I think that's in the Gospel of John, isn't it? Where Jesus is talking about his own future. He would have to die and come back to life. So I think Paul is saying now, let me explain to you how it is, in ways that you can understand, that something that's died can come back to life. And sort of the obvious example is a seed. You put it into the ground, and what happens? It comes to life. And so that's kind of a model for the life that comes after the burial. And I think he's using that to talk here about, okay, what's buried is physical, and then what comes to life is spiritual. Now, he doesn't seem to make reference specifically to Jesus in his resurrected form, but it's hard for me not to imagine the kind of difference that we find in the Gospels when Jesus appears after his resurrection from what he was before, because he was indeed, what shall we say, a real person with a body, and yet somehow there were some significant differences because Jesus would mysteriously appear and then evidently disappear. And nevertheless, though, he said, you can tell when he encountered Thomas, I am the same one I was before. Put your hand in my side,
right.
put your finger in the nail
That's
prints in
right.
my hands. I'm not a spirit, quote. You know?
Yeah.
I haven't assumed a non-physical form, so there is a transformation here. Now, I think there's a lot here that challenges us, but anyway, that's sort of my take on this. What he's trying to do is overcome the objection that there's no way to conceive of something that's died and that comes back to life from the dead in any sort of physical way. And Paul is offering an argument here to overcome that objection to the resurrection.
Okay, let me ask a question here. I'm sure all of us have had gardens at home. I know I have. And first you prepare the ground, and then you have a little way of making little indentations, so it's little rows. And then you sow the seed and cover it not too tightly because it's got to push its way up. Now, if you stop there, what's going to happen? Nada, nothing, because it needs to be watered. And so the Spirit, and as we human beings, if you want to liken it to the fact that when we are conceived and are born, and if we don't have anybody to teach us, meaning like the water, then we become distorted. And so it seems to me that this is a very good way he's put it. The resurrection of the body, chapter 16, 15, verse 35 and on down. The first man was dust of the earth, the second man from heaven. How interesting that he would put it that way. The
He has
first-
a
Go
real.
ahead.
He has a a real issue to deal with here in Corinth, because these are Greeks. They have no desire or expectation for resurrection. And as I think about it, if I put myself in that situation, what, if anything, would I have been able to find that would bridge this gap? And here is, he takes a plant, and there is a change of state from seed to whatever flower or vegetable, whatever it is that we are growing. And he sails so close to the wind because he's distinguishing between body and spirit. The spiritual is real. The spirit is intangible. He doesn't give us really indication of the nature of what this body is. He doesn't draw analogy, as you've already said, to Jesus' body. But the point is that this is real.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a problem in a way. You're right, Bernard. I think the fact is that it's both the fact that the seed can live again, as you said very well, Rick, but also that it lives again in a much superior being, doesn't it? Indeed, in verse 37, he says, it is a mere seed, a bare seed, a naked seed in the original Greek. Huh? Yeah. That you look at these unpromising little seeds, you know, and boy, I'm not sure there's life in there anymore, you know. But the point is that what comes forth looks so much beyond what you put into the ground. Thus, the spiritual so much transcends the physical and is that much more astonishing. So when these people, rather cynically, are sitting back and saying, yeah, what kind of body, what can this be, you know? Paul says, it's much better than anything you know now. And the analogy then, of course, with the two atoms gives him a way of getting some leverage on that, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, I wonder, too, if his sort of challenging expression, not to say strange or curious, but a spiritual body, is in a sense a juxtaposition of terms, a conjunction of terms, where you've got the fundamental Hebrew commitment to a physical reality as the basis for reality, but he wants to reach into the Greek world and say, the spiritual is real, but let me tell you, it's not real apart from the physical. So we're enhancing the physical in a way that gives it the kind of permanence and superiority that the Greek audience that you, Bernard, referred to would want. It has to be spiritual, and instead of the opposition between spirit and body, Paul is bringing them together and saying, you know, it may have an origin from somewhere else, but it's nevertheless a body.
And this is sort of a restatement of Acts 17 and Mars Hill, where he introduced the idea, and in general it was not well received. And I guess he's had time to think about that. How can I get this idea across? And from nature, it's a stroke of genius, perhaps, that it's so easily related to.
Paul's a good holistic Adventist. I think that's the problem.
Well, of course, the solution for the transitoriness of life and the loss that time brings, and especially the loss that death represents for the Greeks, was a realm apart from and beyond the physical, where things don't change. They're impervious to change, and they're not material. There's no decay. And Paul is offering an affirmation of the Hebrew belief in the importance of the physical in order to overcome that notion. So it's a transformation of the physical that takes place, and he's reaching here for an explanation of that. I think it's an interesting explanation, but from our perspective, it still leaves a lot of questions.
Yes.
Well, on verse 38, but God gives it a body as he has determined, and to each kind of seed he gives its own body. Now I want you to know, and I'm sure all of you on this panel have read about seeds they have found that maybe have been hundreds of years old, and they'll plant them and water them. Some actually will sprout. So you see, the life is in the seed, even though the seed is dead. And I think it's a wonderful way, if you have children, a wonderful way to bring God into life when you take some seeds, show them how to plant it and water it.
I remember my first garden,
Really? Do you really?
nasturtium.
Nasturtium.
That's a good
My
thing.
parents, they grew quickly and
Yeah.
prolifically,
Some
and
reward.
you can eat it if you have a taste for it, the leaf, yeah.
That's right. Rick.
Well, yeah.
Well, I like gardens, but when you talk about them, I can't help but think of my mother-in-law, who's 97, and who rises early each morning to go out and check on her garden. So since we live together, I don't need to garden. I have the benefit of her gardening,
Yes.
which is the best of all possible worlds.
Does she grow vegetables or is she
She
into
tries.
flowers?
We have some squirrels in the neighborhood that have discovered
Oh,
the garden,
that-
and they're posing
yeah.
tremendous challenges. But I think this confidence that nature gives us of renewal, Paul here is using as I think a reminder that God can take apparently hopeless situations and bring about amazing transformation.
Exactly.
And this is the sort of the basis of this comparison he's using to say, if God can do that with apparently useless seeds in ways that they wouldn't have understood. Now, I don't know how much they understood about the process of germination. My sort of sense is when people in the ancient world put seeds they could have eaten or grain they could have eaten into the ground, it was an act of considerable faith because
Yes.
you put it in and
There
it's a
it
miracle.
comes. That's
because
right.
they attributed it to supernatural power, didn't
Yes,
they? I mean,
yes.
they didn't understand the natural way in which this all works.
It
And
was a
so
mystery.
I know that throughout the Bible, God providing food is one of the most important things God does from the very beginning. It's
That's
God who
right.
provides the food. And, of course, there's this investment. So I wonder if that's kind of the background here where Paul is saying, what goes into the ground may look hopeless, but what comes out can be an amazing transformation. So why should we limit that to the conventional things we put in? There will be a resurrection, and that, of
Sure.
course, would have been a physical reconstitution.
That's right. That's
Paul
right.
then doesn't really answer the technical question of how this happens. Because as you said, the illustration, they didn't know how it happened. It was a mystery, right? So in verse 51, he's going to say, what I'm applying this to is also a mystery. It's a mystery. We don't know. So when they ask the question in verse 35, how does this happen? He is saying, look, accept the mystery for what it is. We have mysteries in this life. There's a greater mystery in the hereafter, but nonetheless, you believe what happens in this life, so take the analogy and run with it, Interestingly enough, in many Bibles today, many translations, the questions in verse 35 are put in quotation marks,
As in,
Indeed,
yeah.
when Paul says someone will ask, that is probably taking words out of their mouths. Probably there's one party in that congregation who rather cynically just say, how can that be? And so it probably is the case that verse 50 should also have quotation marks there around the expression, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. My guess is that too is a borrowed saying from them. He's quoting their words back at them. But Paul is saying, hey, you believe the one mystery, believe the other. Yep.
I'd like to go back to verse 40 in chapter 15 because I think he's inspired Paul to explain it so even a young child could understand. There are also heavenly bodies and there are earthly bodies, but the splendor of the heavenly bodies is one kind, and the splendor of the earthly bodies is another. The sun has one kind of splendor, the moon another, and the stars another, and the star differs from star in splendor. Now, to me, that is such a beautiful thing because children will pick up on that. That's easy for them to understand.
Yeah.
And that's understandable to us because we have that double meaning for the word body as well.
Yes.
A heavenly body, an earthly body. I mean, but he's looking for difference here, where you can use the same word in a different sense.
So it's like saying there are different ways of being in bodily form.
Yes.
And one can be the bodies that we're used to,
Sure.
but another can be a completely transformed body.
Right.
And that can be a body as well. That's sort of the background here. So he's he's responding to the objection, well, the bodies we have can't go on forever.
And your own language includes that scope of
Right.
meaning, different semantic fields for the same word.
Now, if you go down to where verse 44, from there on, it's a little hard for me to grasp. Maybe you can explain it. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there's also a spiritual body. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, and after the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth, and the second man from heaven. Now, do you get lost there a little bit? If you were somebody who was just reading 1 Corinthians for the first time, wouldn't you wonder, what are they saying here?
I guess one puzzle I have is the translation you appealed to that uses the word natural. My version uses the word physical, which, John, you have a copy of the
the
Greek
original
here.
word there is physikos. Our English word physical
So
is
it's-
just taken right out of the
Right.
Greek. So if I were
So-
translating this, I'd say physical, perhaps, rather than natural. Either one works. But,
One of the points here, though, that's important is we talked about flowers, we talked about planets, sun, moon, and so on, but we need to come to two examples of people that are physical
yeah.
and spiritual people. Now, it's not like humans and animals or humans and stars, but a being and a being. And the first Adam and the second Adam, first is physical, the second is spiritual. And then that brings us right to the prospect of spiritual resurrection as Christ was similarly resurrected.
Yeah.
So he is referring to Christ in his resurrected form, would you say then?
Yes, without it,
kind of a-
but never in describing it. Elsewhere he does, and of course in the Gospels. In Luke, Jesus goes to the trouble of eating the fish and the honeycomb to give some sense of it, but he doesn't do that here.
What is the second man is from heaven? Is he referring to that? Is that sort of the second stage of human existence, or is he making a specific reference to Christ?
I understand it as a specific reference to Christ.
Well, that's how I would understand
Yes.
it. So
Okay.
it's like, okay, we took our, you might say, our fundamental or original identity from our relationship to Adam,
Right.
first human being, but now there is another person from whom we take our identity, and that is a spiritual one who comes from heaven. So
And the format here corresponds to the rabbinic teaching
Yeah.
known as kal vachomer,
That's right.
which means easy. If in an easy situation this is the case, how much more will it be the case in another? And so we move from these examples, the general, to the specific.
Yeah, very typical rabbinic way of coming at it. I think part of the issue is the sequence. First the physical, then the spiritual, the two Adams. And he is saying, in effect, listen, you people in Corinth, that's how it is for you. You are not lesser in the hereafter than you are now. You are indeed greater. And I think that's a new notion for Hellenistic people in the world at that time, in the Mediterranean world,
Would you read on for us, please?
Reading from verse 50, what I'm saying, brothers and sisters, is this: flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Listen, I'll tell you a mystery. We will not all die, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet.
Continue, please.
For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For this perishable body must put on imperishability, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When this perishable body puts on imperishability, and this mortal body puts on immortality, then the saying that is written will be fulfilled, death has been swallowed up in victory.
Well, I think that's beautifully put. We only have a minute left, and I'm going to ask you, John Jones, can you sum this up for us quickly?
Well, we can try, but we'll certainly want to return to it in our next conversation, won't we? Here, Paul takes up again, very briskly and briefly here, the question, how does this happen? He never sets forth the technique, the technology, but he does set forth the events. And these are people who are new Christians. He says, let me spell it out for you again. A, B, C. Here's how it's going to go. The trumpet, the twinkling of an eye, and all of the rest. You don't have to die to inherit eternal life. If any of us, whoever's living at that time, also, we all are changed. Either way, it doesn't matter. Which I think should have been something of a comfort, I think, to these members. So here he is, trying to quickly get this out in front of them, and then he's going to go on to other matters. This is his summary statement.
Right. And the thing I like, which we didn't read, but I'm going to quickly read, where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting?